She banned me from the wedding. No call, no explanation, just a letter with her name on it, sealed in gold like it was something to be proud of. I raced the boy she's marrying. I held him through every scraped knee, every storm, every silence. And now, because I don't fit the image she wants, I was erased. I didn't fight it. I didn't beg. I said nothing at all. But silence is never empty. Sometimes it holds everything you're not ready to hear. And when her perfect day finally came, she learned what it means to cross a woman who remembers everything. Before we continue the story, I just want to say thank you for listening. I'm just a small storyteller, and if this touched you, please consider hitting that subscribe button for more quiet, heartwarming stories like this one. Let me know in the comments where and what time you're listening from. I read them all. Now let's hear the story. It was a quiet morning, the kind where nothing announces itself and grief doesn't knock. I was pruning the roses along the side wall, the ones my husband planted 2 decades ago, the ones that still bloom like they don't know he's gone. The sun hadn't fully committed yet, just a pale gleam over the ridge of the roof, like it too was hesitant to show its face. I didn't hear the postman. Only the gravel shifting underfoot and the soft tap of something sliding into the box. I wiped my hands on my apron, walked barefoot across the stones and pulled the envelope out. Heavy paper. Gold foil. My name in a slanted, confident script that wasn't my son's. My stomach recognized it before my eyes did. I held it for a second longer than I needed to, then slid it open with a rusted key from the garden shed. At the request of the couple, we regret to inform you that you are not invited to attend the wedding of Jordan Monroe, my son, and Celeste Darcy, my daughter-in-law. The rest was details. Dates. Dress codes. Venue directions. A map to something I was now excluded from. My hands didn't shake. My eyes didn't water. The rose shears were still warm in my palm. The kitchen sink ran too long while I stared at the faucet. I made tea, forgot it, then made another. The second cup steamed beside me as I sat at the window overlooking the west side of the garden, where Jordan used to bury toy cars and my daughter Nina built fairy houses out of broken flower pots. I couldn't remember the last time he'd called me without Celeste's voice nearby, either faint on the line or embedded in his silence. I suppose I should have expected this. She's the type to correct the world until it fits in her palm. I remember the first time I met her. She wore navy blue and an expression like armor. Her handshake was soft, but her eyes took inventory of everything in the room. Jordan had brought her to my house for Thanksgiving. She complimented the table settings, then rearranged the salad forks without asking. After dinner, she asked if I always used the same recipe for stuffing. I nodded. She smiled and said, "How charming." When she left that night, I stood in the doorway long after her perfume had vanished, thinking, this is a woman who will never forget a grudge. I should have listened harder to that thought. I didn't tell anyone about the letter. Not until Nina came the next evening. She let herself in, shouting from the hallway the way she always had. Her hair was wet from the rain, her eyeliner smeared just enough to betray emotion. She saw the envelope on the counter, opened and waiting like a wound, and snatched it before I could move. She read it once. Then again. Her face went still. What the hell is this? She doesn't want me there. What about Jordan? Did he say anything? I shrugged. That shrug was all I could give her. I didn't want to speak the thing that kept looping in my mind. If he'd disagreed, he would have stopped it. He didn't. Nina dropped the letter on the floor. Her voice rose. You gave your life for that boy. You raised him alone. You built him from scratch. And he lets her, some porcelain princess with curated eyebrows, tell you you're not welcome? I bent to pick up the letter. Folded it carefully. Placed it in the drawer beneath the tea bags and paper napkins. She watched me with disbelief blooming across her face. You're not going to do anything? I already did, I said. That night after she left, after the dishes were rinsed and the lights dimmed, I went to the study. The walls still held the smell of cedar and old ink, the ghosts of my husband's books crowding the shelves. There's a drawer in the filing cabinet I rarely open. The lock sticks. My fingers found the rhythm anyway. Inside, a folder wrapped in twine. Stamped across the top in faded blue, Willow Glen Estate. It was the place where Jordan took his first steps on the uneven lawn. Where we once hosted a memorial for my mother beneath the flowering dogwoods. Where my husband had danced with me barefoot and laughing before the diagnosis. I ran my fingers over the paper as if I were reading Braille. I had once dreamed of giving Jordan his wedding there. When he got engaged to Celeste, I suggested it gently. She smiled like a knife wrapped in velvet, and said she'd already found the perfect venue. I said nothing. I let it go. Now apparently it had come back to me. I opened my laptop. Typed in a name I hadn't seen in years. Margot Lynn. Daughter of the woman who once owned Willow Glen. She and I had sat on the porch one summer, both pregnant, both holding lemonade glasses slick with sweat. We'd dreamed together once. I found her number. I called. Her voice was slower than I remembered. Worn at the edges. Elias. Margot. I'd like to buy it. She paused. The estate. Yes. Another pause longer. Why now? Because it's still mine, I said. It just doesn't know it yet. We didn't talk about the wedding. We didn't talk about Celeste. There was no need. Women like us, we learn to speak in absences. When I hung up, the room felt heavier. Like it was listening. Outside, the garden swayed in the wind. The roses were still standing, pink and defiant. I closed the drawer. I turned off the light. And for the first time since I held that letter, I allowed myself to smile. Not because I was angry. Not because I wanted revenge. Because there are things you don't take from a mother. Not quietly. Not cleanly. Not without cost. The road to Willow Glen hadn't changed much. Same cracked fence posts leaning in tired conversation. Same rusted mailbox at the curve that once held birthday invitations, thank you cards, a condolence letter I never opened. The air here carried a different kind of weight. Heavier, like it remembered more than it let on. I rolled down the window halfway. The wind brought in the scent of old leaves, earth, and something floral beneath it. Not the showy kind Celeste favored, lilacs or imported peonies, but wilder, less cooperative things. Honeysuckle. Cut grass. Ghosts. The tires crunched against the gravel drive. I parked beneath the old sycamore. Its branches bent low, heavy with age and summer. I used to sit under it with a paperback and a sweating glass of mint tea, Jordan sleeping in my lap. That tree had shaded every version of me, daughter, wife, mother, widow. Now I had come back as something else entirely. The main house stood tall at the center of the property, still wrapped in ivy, still proud despite the years. Paint peeled in corners. The porch sagged in places. But it had grace, the kind of beauty that doesn't need permission. The kind that stays no matter who walks away. Margot Lynn answered the door like she'd expected me. No surprise, no smile. Just the slow, assessing gaze of a woman who's lived long enough to know when something important is happening. You cut your hair, she said. You stopped dyeing yours. We stood there for a beat too long. Then she stepped aside. Come in. The inside smelled like bergamot and dust. Same mismatched teacups, same faded wallpaper. Her mother's touch lingered on every surface. It made my chest ache in a way I didn't want to explain. She led me to the back sunroom, where light fractured through the glass and spilled onto the floor in gold patches. We sat. The silence between us was not awkward. Just full. I heard about the wedding, she said finally. I traced a finger along the edge of my cup. You don't have to pretend you don't know what I'm here for. I figured, she said. I saw your name come through the property office last week. I was waiting for the call. You still hold the deed. Mostly. Paperwork's complicated. My brother wants to sell finally. Full buyout. You sure? I'm not here for drama, I said. I'm not here for revenge. He gave me a long look. But you're here. I didn't answer that. She didn't need me to. We moved to the porch with our tea. The wood beneath my feet creaked in familiar notes. It sang the same song I used to listen to at twilight, rocking with a baby in my arms. I watched two deer nose the far edge of the lawn, unbothered by our presence. I miss your husband, Margot said suddenly. I do too. Still. He used to fix things without being asked. He never fixed the cabinet door. The one in the guest house. It still sticks, I bet. It does. She smiled the first time her face softened. I didn't think you'd ever come back here. I didn't think I'd need to. He watched me for a long while, then nodded. The staff's still mostly the same. Some new faces. They'll do what they're told. I'll be discreet. You don't need to be. That hung in the air. A permission I hadn't expected. I don't want to ruin anything, I said. Liar, she said gently. But you don't want to humiliate her. No. What do you want? I stared out at the meadow where Jordan had once chased soap bubbles in the wind, barefoot and laughing. To remind them whose soil this is. She said nothing. Just stood, went inside, returned with a file. She laid it between us. You can sign today. We'll backdate if needed. I took the pen. My name looked too calm on the page. As I finished, I heard her voice before I saw her. Sharp, clipped, commanding. Too much white. I asked for soft blue accents. Celeste. She rounded the far corner of the chapel, followed by a planner clutching a clipboard. She wore linen the color of a bleached sky, sunglasses pushed into her hair like a crown. She gestured toward the roses lining the entry path. These need to go. They're dated. The planner hesitated. They were planted by the original owners. Then they've served their time. I didn't move. Didn't flinch. Just watched her from the shadows of the porch, protected by the soft screen and distance. She walked with confidence that hadn't yet been tested, the kind that thought it could walk through fire and come out gold. Jordan wasn't with her. She turned toward the chapel, still issuing orders. I want the ceremony facing west. Better light for photos. Her voice echoed once. Then again. Then silence. Margot didn't speak. Neither did I. Eventually the screen door creaked behind me. I stood. My teacup had gone cold. She doesn't know? She doesn't even know to ask. That night, I lay in bed in my quiet house, the contract folder beside me. My thumb traced the edge of the paper until it hurt. Celeste didn't need me at her wedding. But she would need something. Water. Electricity. Land. Permission. She would find none of it. Because some things, no matter how well she curates her life, are still mine. And this land remembers me. It always has. The house at Willow Glen has a second floor. Most guests never see it. It's not in the brochures or on the glossy wedding blog pages. But it's there, quiet, with dust-soft windows that overlook the entire estate like an old woman watching her children grow up and go wrong. I spent most of the day up there behind the gauzy curtains, my tea cooling beside me as I watched the rehearsal unfold below. Celeste had arrived early, of course. Her voice carried like a chisel through wood, sharp and precise. She moved through the courtyard with purpose, trailing fabric and decisions, her white rehearsal dress clinging like it needed her approval. The planner walked 3 steps behind, nodding too much, scribbling nothing. She clapped once, delicate, controlled, and the bridal party froze like mannequins. We'll need to reposition the chairs. Angled toward the light, not the altar. And the petals should be ivory, not blush. Blush reads cheap. Someone tried to protest. Celeste tilted her head and smiled. It was the kind of smile that made you question whether you'd imagined the threat. From my perch, I could see the staff hesitate. They were no longer hers, not really. I had made that change quietly with Margot's help. Contract transfers. Payroll rerouting. No announcements. Just a shift in gravity. Jordan arrived late, looking rushed and slightly damp, as if he'd run through the mist instead of around it. His hair was longer than I remembered. He greeted Celeste with a kiss that landed somewhere near her cheekbone. She barely reacted. Instead, she handed him a schedule. You'll need to stay close to Hen for timing. And I need you to reread your vows. They're too short. I thought they were supposed to be honest. They can be honest and still poetic, she said, adjusting a napkin that wasn't folded to her liking. Jordan didn't respond. He stood there holding the paper like it had weight, like maybe it said more than he knew how to. Hen, or her full name Henrietta Hen Voss, is Celeste's best friend. She hovered in the background, her eyes taking in everything but giving nothing away. There was something about her stillness that reminded me of myself in younger years. Observant, silent, always cataloging. I'd met her once, briefly, at a dinner. She had shaken my hand firmly and complimented my garden. It was the only part of that evening I remembered with fondness. Down below, Celeste launched into a critique of the table settings. Jordan murmured something about wanting to walk through his vows alone. She nodded without turning. From where I stood, he looked like a boy again. A boy in a rented suit trying to memorize a script written for someone else. I wondered if he could still feel me. The part of him I had shaped with my own hands, before he ever knew how to choose distance over loyalty. Later I made my way downstairs. I took the long route through the side garden, my footsteps soft on the mulch-covered path. The garden had grown wild since the last time I tended it, and I let it remain that way. There's a kind of honesty in untamed things. The chapel was empty. The rehearsal had ended. The space still held the shape of bodies the way air remembers sound. I stepped inside. My fingers brushed along the back of the last pew, then the next. Each one like a heartbeat. I paused in the center aisle. The sun cut through the stained glass and laid patterns across the wood like watercolor bruises. I stood there a while, letting it touch my skin. This was once a holy place. Not in the religious sense, but in the way that family can be holy when it's whole. I lit a candle beneath the altar, not for prayer. For presence. For what had been lost. I left it burning when I walked out. Back in the main house, I opened the ledger. Staff reassignments were nearly done. Vendors had been refunded quietly. Deliveries rerouted or cancelled. Nothing dramatic. Just absence applied like pressure. Invisible. I didn't need to ruin her day. I only needed to remind her she hadn't built it alone. That night, I sat on the porch with Margot. We shared a glass of red wine, the kind that stains your mouth and your memory. She didn't ask how the rehearsal went. She had seen the cars come and go. She's sure of herself, Margot said. Yes. She thinks that makes her safe. Yes. You're going to let her find out otherwise? No, I said. I'm going to let her find out she's never been seen at all. The stars came out slowly. I watched them blink into place, soft and scattered, like reminders of something too far away to hold. Inside, my phone vibrated once. A message from Jordan. Rehearsal went okay. Thanks for checking in. Hope everything's good on your end. Love you. I stared at it for a long time. There was no mention of the letter. Of the exclusion. No apology. Just that same hollowed-out kindness he used when he didn't want to ask the real questions. I didn't reply. I walked to my bedroom, set the phone face down on the dresser, and lay on top of the covers, fully dressed, staring at the ceiling until morning. I didn't cry. I hadn't cried in months. But I thought about the way Celeste moved her hands when she spoke. Precise, decisive, like she was shaping the air. And I thought about Jordan's eyes, which once lit up at the sound of my voice, now dulled by the effort of keeping peace where there was no war, only silence. Tomorrow I'd make the final arrangements. Not for destruction. Not for revenge. For memory. For truth. For the invisible things that hold a house up long after the people forget who built it. Nina burst through the side door like a storm. No knocking, no text, just wind and fury in human form. I was slicing an apple in the kitchen, thin little moons laid out on a cracked porcelain plate. She stopped when she saw me. Her eyes dropped to the envelope on the counter. White. Addressed in my handwriting. She looked at it like it might hiss. You wrote him a letter. I did. She exhaled sharply. Threw her keys onto the table. You know you don't owe him that. I placed another slice beside the others. It's not about owing. It's about dignity. And respect. And the fact that he let that woman cut you out of your own child's wedding like you were an ex-wife and not his mother. The knife paused. I looked at her, not angry, not placating. Just tired in the bones. He's still my son. She ran a hand through her hair, pacing. Her boots left tiny puddles on the tile. You can't keep letting people get away with pretending you're not part of the story. I'm not pretending. I'm remembering. She stared at me. What does that even mean? I pushed the plate toward her. She didn't take it. The letter sat between us like a third presence, humming with everything unsaid. I folded it, slid it into a second envelope and handed it to her. Give this to him. The morning of. Her voice dipped. What's in it? Nothing she'd understand. She held it without speaking. Then she nodded once. Fiercely. As if she were promising something to herself, not to me. That afternoon, the clouds settled low over the estate, turning everything a shade darker. From the upstairs window, I watched the setup continue. White folding chairs lined in rigid rows, strings of fairy lights curling like veins across the hedges. Everything looked perfect, curated, brittle. Celeste was at the center of it all, clipboard in hand, voice like glass on tile. We need to cut 10 more guests. Jordan says we're at capacity. Her planner hesitated. The RSVPs. I'll handle it. She scrolled through her phone like she was erasing numbers, not names. Hen sat nearby, legs crossed, sipping something pale from a tall glass. She didn't speak. Just watched. I want everyone seated by aesthetic, Celeste continued. No clashing colors. No florals that distract from the aisle. And no children. They ruin the photos. Hen tilted her head. You're building a stage, not a wedding. Celeste looked up, expression unreadable. What's the difference? Hen didn't answer. She just went back to sipping, her eyes finding something else to land on. I wondered briefly what Hen saw, and whether Celeste would ever ask the question she should have. Who's paying attention when everyone else is looking away? I called the estate's staff manager that evening. Quiet check-ins. A few changes. All logistical. Everything on schedule? He asked. Yes, I said. But tomorrow no vendors unless personally approved. I want full control of the gate. Yes, ma'am. Also, I added, move the rose arch from the side garden to the chapel entrance. Pause. The bride had that removed. Not anymore. He didn't argue. By nightfall the wind had picked up. The garden swayed like an orchestra tuning before the first note. I stood on the back porch and watched the fairy lights flicker to life, one by one against the soft collapse of dusk. The estate was quiet now, empty of guests. Just preparation left. Final touches. Invisible hands. I thought of Jordan as a little boy holding my hand at the farmer's market, pointing to sunflowers taller than he was, saying, "Mama, look. They're reaching up." He doesn't say things like that anymore. He doesn't reach for me at all. I don't blame him. Not completely. Life wears the softness out of people. Sometimes it teaches them to trade truth for peace. Sometimes it just gives them someone else's voice. Inside the chapel I walked the aisle alone. The chairs had been set, the altar dressed in pale silks. I brushed my fingers along the edge of a pew and imagined what might have been. My son beaming, Nina crying, my husband's name whispered like a blessing into the wind. But none of that would happen now. And still I felt no rage. No bitterness. Just the echo of a life that had once passed through this space and left something behind. Something she couldn't decorate over or erase with imported flowers. I pulled the letter from my pocket. Read it once more silently. It wasn't an accusation. It wasn't a weapon. It was a key. Something small and sharp and quiet enough to fit into the lock that had sealed Jordan away from me. I would place it into his hands on the day she tried to make him hers completely. Not to remind him of me, but to remind him of himself. The lights above the altar buzzed faintly. I turned them off one by one as I left. The wind outside smelled like rain. Not a storm. Just the kind that softens things. Readies the ground for something else. Nina had already gone home. The envelope was in her coat pocket. The staff were under new orders. And the roses were already blooming at the chapel's doors. The rain came just before dusk. Not a thunderous downpour, but a soft, persistent mist that draped itself over the trees like a shawl. The kind of rain that doesn't ask for attention, only lingers, changing everything quietly. I stood at the window, fingers wrapped around a cup of black tea gone lukewarm, and watched the gray settle over Willow Glen. The night before a wedding is supposed to buzz with joy. Laughter down hallways. Footsteps echoing with anticipation. But tonight the estate felt suspended, holding its breath like it knew what I had done. I didn't feel guilty. Not even a little. Jordan hadn't called. Not to check on me. Not to explain. Not even to pretend. Instead, the staff texted confirmation that everything had shifted as planned. Deliveries redirected, vendors refunded, power access rerouted to my command. I hadn't needed to threaten anyone. I had just taken back what was mine. What had always been mine. Margot joined me on the porch just after 7. She carried 2 glasses of wine and a linen wrap slung across her shoulders. She didn't speak for a long time. Just sat, her glass resting on her knee, eyes on the field beyond the chapel. They added more lighting, she said finally. Temporary rigs. Makes the lawn look like a film set. It is one, I said. She sipped slowly. You think she knows? No. You think he does? I didn't answer. Inside, someone was rehearsing a song on a violin. Soft, a little unsure. The kind of sound that makes you nostalgic for things you haven't lost yet. Margot looked at me again. You're not going to stop the wedding, are you? No. Then what is all this? I looked down at my hands. They were older now, more worn than I remembered. But they still knew how to do one thing well. Tend to things. Flowers. Houses. Moons. I'm not here to destroy anything. Then what? I'm here to let it fall. The candle I'd lit the night before still sat beneath the altar. I relit it before dinner. Its flame danced low and gold, barely visible in the shadows. I didn't need it to illuminate anything. I just needed it to be there. Upstairs I heard Celeste's voice. She was in the bridal suite, testing her walk again, practicing how her veil would fall. I saw her briefly through the window, standing in profile, one hand against the mirror, whispering to her own reflection. "Celeste Monroe," she said softly. "Celeste Monroe." She repeated it like an incantation, as if saying the name enough would make it hers. She'd chosen the guest house for her final night before the wedding. It used to be a nursery long ago. The wallpaper was still faintly visible beneath new paint, tiny moons and rabbits worn pale by time. I wondered if she noticed them. I doubted it. The staff had set out the gown, laid across the bed like a sleeping body. Lace and silk shimmering under the lamplight. She circled it like it might disappear. In the corner of the suite sat a box of gifts, each tagged with names she'd approved. Her future mother-in-law had no such tag. I wondered if she even noticed, or if she'd long since rewritten the narrative in her mind where I never existed. Or worse, where I had been cast long ago as the antagonist in a play she authored by hand. But I wasn't angry. I didn't want her destroyed. She'd already done that to herself, piece by piece. Later I walked the chapel alone. It was dressed like a dream, soft white petals lining the aisle, candles flickering low in glass vases, pale drapery gathered like sighs at the corners. She had vision, I'll give her that. But beauty without roots is a temporary thing. And I know this land. I know the wind that speaks through the willows. The echo beneath the floorboards where Jordan used to drop his toy cars and laugh when they rattled down the slats. The chip in the third pew from when Nina tried to carve her initials. The oil stain where my husband's hands once steadied me during a vow renewal that no one else attended but the sky. This chapel is not just a backdrop. It's a witness. I placed a small sprig of rosemary on the first pew. For memory. For what had been promised then withheld. I sat for a while, hands folded in my lap. Listening. There are sounds people never hear unless they've been abandoned long enough to crave them. The creak of old wood settling, the brush of rain against the window pane, the breath of a flame flickering in a space too large for it. They all spoke to me that night. Outside the fairy lights clicked on one by one. The lawn was glowing. A field of pretend stars waiting for a ceremony that would never begin. Margot found me in the chapel around 10. She didn't enter. Just stood at the door, silhouetted against the gold wash of the porch. "Everything's set." "Good. You sure you're okay?" "I'm not angry," I said. "I just wanted to be quiet enough for her to hear what silence says." He lingered, then nodded and disappeared into the dark. I stayed until the candle burned low. When I left, I walked the long way around, past the roses at the chapel entrance, now fully open despite the chill. They were my husband's roses. Not hers. Not the planner's. Not the florist's. They'd been growing here long before Celeste chose white peonies. And tomorrow, when the cars arrive and the guests gather and the gates do not open, they'll still be here. Blooming for no one. And for me. The morning broke golden, quiet. Too quiet in the way the world feels before something falls. Mist still clung to the grass and the sky, washed clean from the night's soft rain, looked like a silk sheet pulled taut. I stood at the window with a fresh cup of tea and watched the first car pull up the winding drive. A white SUV. Ribboned handles. Blush programs stacked neatly in the passenger seat. The woman who stepped out wore a pale hat in confusion. She stood at the edge of the gravel drive, staring at the wrought iron gate as if expecting it to open for her on command. It didn't. She turned back to the gate. Tugged once more, desperate now. Still locked. I stepped back then, deeper into the trees. The ache in my chest wasn't triumph. It wasn't even satisfaction. It was a long, low exhale I hadn't known I was holding. The chapel sat untouched behind the gates, dressed in florals and candles, aisle lined with ivory petals. A ceremony perfect and empty. No audience. No promises. Just the sound of birds in the canopy above and the long, slow hush of something being undone without violence. By noon, most of the guests had left. Some tried to smile as they passed. Some didn't look up at all. Jordan stood for a long time near the edge of the drive, one hand in his pocket, eyes distant. I thought for a moment he might look toward the trees. That he'd see me. That he'd come. He didn't. Nina touched his arm, said something. He nodded. They left together slowly. Celeste stayed behind. She stood alone at the gate, veil trembling in the wind. I watched her for a moment longer, then turned away. Behind me the chapel doors remained closed. And beneath the altar my candles still burned. The bouquet lay on the gravel like it had been dropped by accident, but I knew it hadn't. Celeste placed things down with intention, even her mistakes. Pale ivory roses, bound in satin, now browned at the edges where the morning's moisture had begun to settle in. The kind of decay you don't notice until you've already inhaled it. She stood there beside it, shoulders too still. No screaming. No scene. Just silence thick enough to press against the ribs. Her veil had slipped slightly to one side, but she hadn't noticed. The dress no longer looked bridal. It looked misplaced. As though someone had sewn all her ambition into fabric and it had nowhere left to go. Hen stood a few feet away. She'd been the only one who hadn't tried to leave. Her expression was hard to read, but it was a rare thing. Honest. She took a single step toward Celeste, then paused. I didn't know, Hen said gently. About the venue. About any of it. Celeste didn't answer. Hen knelt down, picked up the bouquet, brushed dirt from the ribbon and held it out. Celeste looked at it like it was foreign. Then she turned and walked away. The bouquet remained in Hen's hands. She didn't call after her. She simply laid the flowers back on the gravel and followed at a distance. I watched from the edge of the clearing where the garden dipped slightly, just enough to veil me in leaves and shadow. I hadn't moved since morning. The earth had started to warm beneath my feet. The guests were gone now. Every last car. No chatter, no perfume trailing through the air. Just quiet. Real quiet. The kind that doesn't ask for anything. It simply arrives. Jordan stood at the edge of the lawn, halfway between the road and the gate. His hands were in his pockets, head tilted slightly like he was trying to make sense of something too big for words. He hadn't seen me yet. Or maybe he had and didn't want to. Nina came toward him from the main house. She wasn't angry anymore. Just tired in the way people get when they've said everything and none of it landed. She touched his shoulder. He didn't flinch. I gave her the letter, she said. He nodded once. She never looked at me. Just handed it back. Like it burned. He looked toward the chapel. The lights were still on inside, flickering behind stained glass that now felt almost performative. The altar had been untouched. Not a single petal out of place. She still thinks she was right, he said quietly. She might believe that forever. I thought love was supposed to change people. It does, Nina said. Just not always the way you expect. He turned then. Not toward her. Toward me. He looked directly into the trees. I didn't move. He didn't speak. He stood there for maybe 10-15 seconds, long enough for the silence to start feeling shaped like a question. Then he looked away back toward the chapel. I need to leave, he said. Nina didn't argue. They walked together to the car. Not hand in hand. Just parallel. I stayed. Once the dust settled behind the last set of tires, I stepped from the trees. The estate was impossibly still. A ceremony had been scheduled here. Vows. Applause. Music. Instead, the place had become a mausoleum for what didn't happen. I walked slowly toward the chapel. The doors had remained open, wide and welcoming, waiting for something that never arrived. The white runner down the aisle still gleamed. I stepped inside. No one had been here. Not the planner. Not the bride. Not the officiant. It was perfect. And completely untouched. I moved through the space with reverence. My footsteps echoed. The scent of hydrangea and white rose hung low in the air. For a moment I imagined them again, Jordan and Celeste, standing at the altar saying the words. I imagined guests wiping their eyes, the shudder of a camera, her laughter floating up like chiffon. But none of that existed. Only the stillness remained. I walked to the front pew and sat down. My body folded into the quiet like it had been waiting to be invited back. I let my hand rest against the wood, tracing the same grain my husband once smoothed with sandpaper before we opened the chapel to the public. Everything here was touched by us. The beams. The stone path. The little imperfections that had become signatures over time. I sat there for a long time. Let the silence settle around my shoulders like a shawl. It wasn't triumph I felt. It wasn't even peace. It was closure. Not the kind with a bow. The kind that leaves you alone in a chapel meant to be filled. I rose eventually. Walked the length of the aisle, the hem of my dress brushing against petals meant for someone else. At the door I turned back once. No music. No words. No ghosts. Only the candle still burning beneath the altar. I left it there. Outside, the clouds were beginning to break apart. The sun spilled gently over the lawn, and for the first time in a very long while, the house felt like it belonged to itself again. I walked slowly toward the side path that led home. Gravel shifted beneath my shoes. The wind had picked up slightly, just enough to stir the edges of my coat. And as I reached the curve in the path I saw it. The bouquet. Still there. Tired. Weather-wilted. I didn't pick it up. Some things are meant to be left behind. The morning light stretched long across the garden, touching everything with that soft, uncertain warmth that only comes after something has been emptied out. I moved slowly, pruning the last of the white roses before the heat settled in. The petals had browned slightly along the edges, just enough to remind me that even beauty carries expiration. It had been 3 weeks since the wedding that wasn't. Or maybe 4. Time had slipped into itself like a drawer you don't bother opening anymore. No one spoke about it. Not publicly. The papers offered only murmurs. Mysterious wedding shut down at historic Willow Glen. No scandal. No names. Just silence, the kind too deliberate to be accidental. Jordan hadn't reached out. Not directly. Nina said he was living alone now in a little apartment near the city. No furniture yet, just a mattress on the floor, a pile of dishes still in boxes. She said he kept the letter I wrote him on the nightstand. I don't know if I believe that. Margot came by every other morning with black coffee and a paper bag of croissants, half of which we never ate. We sat on the porch and talked about nothing. The roses. The heat. The way grief changes its scent in the summer. Today she brought only herself. No coffee. She shook her head. Didn't sleep. Something wrong. She didn't answer right away. Instead, she reached into the pocket of her jacket and pulled out a small envelope. Cream-colored. Unlabeled. I found this in the chapel. She handed it to me without ceremony. No explanation. I knew the handwriting instantly. Not Jordan's. Not Nina's. He looked down at his hands. Do you hate her? No, I said. I see her. We stayed like that until the stars began to stitch themselves into the sky. When we stood to leave, he didn't say goodbye. He just squeezed my hand. And for the first time in a long while, I let him. Thank you for listening. Hit the subscribe button if you want more stories like this. See you later.